we're going to get going now with our Utilization Management webinar series. It's the second in the presentations, talking about implementing effective practices. And for those of you who were not in on the first session, what we do is go over a series of slides that you'll see, and I will talk you through those slides, not reading every single word, leaving some time for you to do that on your own, but going through those at some length, and then we're going to be throwing it open to questions, and hopefully we can get those questions answered. Anything that we can't answer today, we will take on advisement, and we will be getting answers back out to you. This is who I am, Elizabeth Peterson-Vita. I am a licensed psychologist. I'm the Vice President of Innovations at ICL, and I do have particular knowledge about the utilization management process because prior to my coming to ICL, I was the Chief Clinical Officer at a managed care company and was responsible for the Utilization Management Division. So I can talk to you from that side of the fence as well. Here are our objectives for today, in a nutshell, to understand more about the implementation of practices, learning from the experience of other organizations who've already gone through that, and then also speaking in terms of providers and MCOs, and that the questions will help clarify the way forward for everyone to be implementing and to know what to expect, what to prepare for, what kind of ground to cover in order to be ready for the big day. And before we even speak about the utilization management checklist, which is quite extensive, I just wanted to go over a few things about utilization management and how come? Why do we even do this? Why is it so important? I'm sure everyone's aware it's a core function of managed care. It ensures that from the managed care perspective, it ensures that the MCO pays only for services that are medically necessary, and the medical necessity question is one that comes up all the time, is at the heart of utilization management. And as part of those reviews, the determination that the MCO is looking for with is whether the service is necessary and appropriate for someone's matching their symptoms, their treatment, their recovery, and also reviewing the appropriate length of care, the estimated length of care that would accrue to the particular presentation that they have. And while there's some trepidation about managed care and utilization management, on the positive side, I think that providers can always think about how can assist in informing practice changes in terms of helping more positive outcomes for a particular person. When done effectively, when you follow all of the guidelines and do that with all of the timelines in place, it assures the flow of funding for the services that are being provided, because it should all roll in very nicely. And I think with providers, as you look at some of the things that are part of it helps you better understand your population and planning for folks, and also ascertaining where there may be service gaps and what could be done to plug in those gaps, or indeed even to propose to the MCOs. So those are some things in terms of background to be thinking about. As we talk about the utilization management preparation checklist, there are many different things here which are on this list. But we're really going to talk about those first four things: agency culture, organizational structure to help bring it about, information, it's important for the MCO, which is a two-way street, and agency practices and processes. The other things here are things which we may touch on next time when we talk about supervision, and I would venture to say that some of our topics around technology and QI are really infused throughout all of this. So keep an open mind about those things as well as we talk about because those are important parts of the process. Okay, so as we start off with the checklist itself, organizational culture has to be very much on top of in terms of its importance to the organization in general, meeting customer expectations, improving outcomes, and certainly also managing revenues, which are very important to providers and to everyone, because if we want our clients to continue getting our services, we all want to be in business for that to happen. And also to recognize the importance of staff in working with the MCOs. So these are very important people, players, intermediaries, if you will. The staff members are an important part of the treatment team for services. So they may not be delivering the actual treatment, but in their intermediary function, they're very important. They attend treatment team meetings, they get the updates, and they're the people who may often be speaking to the MCO and talking about discharges, et cetera. So these are people who really need to be in the nub of the action. And the next part here about staff member workspaces proximate to the service delivery team, what we're talking about is, if at all possible, either literally or virtually, to have people close by the people who are up on the front lines, because many times the communication with the MCO needs to be very time sensitive. So certainly the people need to be able to get that information and be able to turn it around quickly. So whatever particular system works well for you, just bear that in mind, because sometimes there's not a lot of time to think about delivery of information and turning it around, et cetera. It should be done as quickly as possible. Okay, now as we think about some aspects here for the MCO, one thing that I wanted to just bring up that's not on the checklist is, because we're talking about from your agency, what you need to know about the MCO. One of the things that I think is important is for you to be sure that the MCO has your provider information as well, and make sure that they do, because I've seen, unfortunately, sometimes that information go awry, and the MCO does not have the correct contact information and phone numbers and emails and who the right contact people are, and if you've had key changes in some of your personnel, to keep the MCO aware of that. So those are things that proactively you want to tell the MCO. You would prefer for the MCO not to be trying to contact you and every email is a dead email, for example. So that's just a little tip from the inside. But beyond that, from your perspective as an agency, that the agency knows all the MCOs which work within your area, which you would know because of your contracts, et cetera, that you have the provider manuals for all the MCOs as well, so you could always refer back to those things or know where to access those things online. That the agency has department contact information for the MCOs, so you know who are the go-to people for in terms of the MCO, and would strongly recommend that you have the name and phone number for contact for the behavioral health medical director. If there's also a clinical director that you're working with, have that person available as well, because there may be times when you have to really cut to the chase and you need to contact these people, and again, you don't want to lose time trying to root around for that information. You should always have the current level of care information, the continued stay criteria, service caps for information for all your services, level of care, all of that. You've reviewed that, you've discussed any kind of changes, updates, et cetera, and especially that you know the process for denial and appeals information. Okay, hold on. We already have a question that's come in. So let me just see what that is and if I can answer that now. I'll just read that out. When you think about functions, having designated person, clinic of roughly 300 clients, what's the ratio of staff to the census? Average comment. There's no particular algorithm that really informs about that. So, I can't really give you a definite answer on this. As long as you have somebody designated, I would strongly suggest that. And, you may be something that you try to prepare in advance. It may be something that you have to keep an eye out later on as you go for perhaps increasing that, or if you have any vacant positions, maybe some conversion or a part-time piece that people can do. But there's no hard and fast rule for this. So you may want to think of some various opportunities on that. Okay. The agency practices and processes, having developed initial processes based on the expectation of the MCO, so you know how you're going to go about doing this, et cetera, so you have a kind of a smooth plan. You know about the concurrent expectations of the MCOs. For example, if you're looking at reauthorizations, at what point is the MCO going to be asking you to submit your reauthorization request? Sometimes the MCO will give you a window when they want that done, and you can't really send it in too soon. They probably won't look at that. They'll just put it aside. So there is something of a sweet spot on that. To look at data collection template for every MCO and the service, because data collection is very important to all of this, and hence your IT department having, I always like to use the phrase fully functional IT department to have that information is important. I think also that your staff, or certainly clinical staff and clinical leadership, educates the treatment team about the expectations put on the agency by the MCOs and the philosophy of engagement, best outcomes, and all of this piece. I think that's very important for that, all of that to have be discussed within the organization as a whole. The next one here is always very important, starting on day one of admission. And we've talked about that theoretically all along in terms of clinical work, but as soon as someone comes into your care, what are you thinking about in terms of where is this person moving to? Where are you hoping that they will be moving to? So that's part of your utilization management, even thinking about that. And transition, even thinking theoretically, where can this person go to? What are some of the supports that would have to be in place? What do we need to work towards on that? Certainly on the inpatient side as well, that has to start day one, because the inpatient stays are shorter than they were in the past. We need to be thinking as soon as somebody is on the floor what the discharge options are going to be, because sometimes those discharges and those disposition needs are very intense, and we have to start putting things into play and making calls and trying to sew that up. I think it's really important as well that all of our practices maintain our philosophies about being person-centered, having a recovery focus. That's all part of the transition, that the person, the client, is also an active participant in all of these kinds of processes, that they know what's going on with that they have an awareness about that, and that is shared. And certainly from the MCO perspective, they are looking for plans that are not cookie cutter and always the same kind of disposition for each person. They're looking for the person-centeredness, for indications that the person has participated in this, that their needs are being met, et cetera, and how is recovery, per se, supported as well. We would always look for in the MCO best practices, not only in terms of best practice that might match a particular diagnosis, but also best practices in terms of philosophy as well. That the agency looks for any concerns that are going to be barriers to transition in terms of level of care. And certainly if there are significant barriers, those need to be discussed with the MCO as well. So those are things the MCO needs to be aware of some of those challenges. That the agency identifies issues that could be contributing factors to a readmission. So why does somebody need to be in treatment for a certain level of time? What kind of particular supports do they need? How are the services helping to guard against relapse when and if possible to any extent? Certainly that the agency addresses both behavioral health and the physical health needs of an individual during a hospital stay, so that the kinds of things on inpatient stays that we would look at included not obviously the behavioral health of someone who was admitted to a psychiatric floor, but if there was a consultation liaison situation because of other medical concerns of the person, what was happening to ensure that that happened while the person was still in the hospital, and were they having that outpatient done as well. And I would say even on an outpatient level of stay with people where there are significant medical issues that are contributing to the person's distress and presentation, how have those needs been addressed as well? And certainly here, in terms of internal workflows for responsibilities for staff members, so people know the parts that they are going to play and how they're going to be able to do that. And I think what worked for us, which was often helpful, was that those are things you can write them out in a narrative, but if you can have a visual display, for example, mapped out in a Visio or a similar kind of software package, that's helpful, sort of at a glance. Who does what? Who's in charge of what? Who do you need to find to do what if questions arise? Okay. Let's see what we have here. Certainly in terms of developing population-level reporting strategies to identify outliers as well. Because population statistics are very important as well for the whole process. We're going to be looking more at aggregate data about populations. And certainly we want to identify information about outliers for length of stay, et cetera. And by that, you're going to be looking at outliers in terms of program and also in terms of staff. Are there particular staff whose clients seem to be in treatment longer than other people? Is that something you'd expect because they have a more difficult caseload, or are there other situations accounting for that? I would also suggest that proactively that you start identifying who your outliers might be and start to get some understanding of who those outliers are. Why are they outliers? Are there particular needs that they have? How can you address those, et cetera? Because you want to be prepared, because I'm pretty sure the MCO will target those particular people and be asking you a lot of questions about them. So this way you already have some answers prepared to speak to those things. That you routinely assess the person's transition, discharge readiness. The idea is, with a recovery focus, that not everyone will be in the same level of treatment indefinitely, that we're always looking to see if someone can move to a less restrictive level of care, have more natural supports as opposed to less paid supports or services, et cetera. So in terms of always keeping an eye towards that. Developing or requiring an assessment tool based on discharge criteria for a particular service, and do that within the treatment team as well. So maybe looking at, if you're looking at what the person needs for a particular service, you may also be looking at symptom reduction, functional assessment. All of these kinds of things can play a part in that as well. And certainly having a crisis plan, but everyone should have a crisis plan, we know that, and the person should have a copy of the crisis plan. And that should be something which is a real useful tool where the person can use it to help manage their own crisis, not have it escalate into emergency. So it's something, a real how-to for themselves. And the crisis plan should certainly be more than calling 911. And at the MCO, we saw our share of crisis plans that looked like that. That was not what we were looking for. We were looking for the kind of really helpful tool for the individual. Really looking for the agency as part of the treatment intervention to communicate with primary supports and current treatment providers as well. So assuming that we have releases of information, the person is interested in their treatment team being able to communicate with those people, certainly do so. And be able to include that in the descriptions of treatment and authorization in terms of how those supports are being woven in as well. And for treatment providers, as someone is moving from a different level of care, particularly if they may be going to a different agency also, that there's a discharge summary that helps to inform the next person in that individual's treatment trajectory, what has been going on, what does the handoff look like as well. Behavioral health follow-ups within 7 days of inpatient discharge. We know that that's a particularly difficult time for people, so that they're no longer meeting inpatient criteria, but often it's a very vulnerable time. So really we want ideally to have a follow-up appointment within 7 days as well. Also that primary care appointments are scheduled when the need is identified. To the extent that we can identify primary care providers for our people that we serve, we certainly want those that to take place as well as part of a holistic emphasis on health in general. And then finally here, too, having a clear process for timely appeal to the MCOs when a claim is denied, assuming that the person receiving the services wishes to appeal and that the current treating provider also feels that feels strongly that the treatment should be appealed, that they had very, very good intentions that that treatment should continue for good reason, have the appeal process well in hand and be able to do that in a very timely way. There are time criteria set for when an appeal can be launched, and there are different levels of criteria. But you want to, if you decide that an appeal should be undertaken, be able to move into that fairly quickly. And just with that as well, thinking about how you would prepare for an appeal, being able to know how to organize and prepare a case for that as well. That's an important thing so that you're well organized when that does come to pass. Okay, and then leadership. That's another crucial piece here that we want to talk about, because leadership sets the tone for the agency in terms of what is going to happen with utilization management, how it rolls out, and the success with regard to the MCOs and having a positive relationship with the MCOs, which will ultimately serve our clients best with that. Okay, so we have a couple of things here that agency staff members appreciate the significant changes that take place with regard to utilization management and understand that the MCO is an important customer as well, just as much of our clients, and should be treated as such. So that even though this may be a new venture for people, and sometimes it's a little difficult and people may feel a bit frustrated at times, about having to answer all these questions about treatment, etc. The MCO is a customer, and we need to be treating people in a collegial and respectful manner as well, and be mindful of timelines, etc. Assuring that people understand the process for the agency and the role that its implementation will play in the agency's overall financial performance, so that the goal is to have as many authorizations to move through as possible, to not be mired in many denials, etc., for people to continue to get the treatment they need, for payments to proceed correctly, etc. And I think that we're all certainly on the same page of believing in quality improvement. This is all part of that large venture, and supporting the agency's quality plan. There's improvement in practice and outcomes, and sometimes the MCO can stir us to our better natures and give us new ideas and new things to think about and try in terms of treatment approaches and best practices. Providing opportunities for staff training to improve outcomes, so any kind of in-services that can happen would certainly be a good thing in terms of outcomes, or using case examples, having clinical rounds to discuss cases in terms of improvement, how evidence-based practices were used successfully. Also to talk about times when for a particular person an evidence-based practice perhaps was tried but did not yield a particularly successful outcome, and in its place what was tried and how did that work. That may be helpful as well. To invest in effective and knowledgeable supervision. Certainly we'll talk about that more next time as well, but supervisors, we have play a very important role in this. Certainly the person and that liaison, again, as the intermediary, has a lot to share, but nothing can replace the value of excellent clinical supervision. And the support of that by leadership is crucial. And then to break down any organizational silos to support timely communication between service providers and the staff. Now, certainly if you have participating in your treatment teams as well, that helps a great deal. But the more that you can have people have a lot of interplay and that communicate a great deal and on a regular basis and have really good working relationships, that will help things a great deal. And then I wanted to include this as well. These are just some food for thought that you might have about planning for change. To use that checklist, it's not gospel necessarily, but it may be helpful to think about some things that you want to have on your list. And among the questions are, well, what will you start doing as part of this new venture? What might you stop doing? What will you keep doing? So I think these are crucial things. Leadership can certainly be manning this post and kind of looking at it. And what will you integrate as well? That goes back to the previous point also about breaking down silos whenever possible as well. Okay. We do have some upcoming events here, which are on our handy-dandy calendar here from MCTAC. We will be having one more webinar next week as well that will focus exclusively on supervision as well. And now we're going to open it up to questions and answers. I see we'd already addressed the question about the staff not having the algorithm. There's another question here about can you provide resources with templates of sample crisis plans? That's an excellent question. I think I will check with my MCTAC colleagues to see if we have something like that. There were some that we used. The previous MCO where I was the Chief Clinical Officer was in North Carolina. We actually used one that was provided by the state of North Carolina, but we were able to also walk our enrolled providers through that and ask people to elaborate on that. We were also infusing that with some recovery plans as well and trying to enlarge that. So I will check here to see with what we have here through MCTAC and see if we can send that out to you, because it's not something I'm aware of right this very minute. As a reminder, people can use the chat function to ask questions as we go, and we'll do our best to answer them. And again, if I can't provide the answers to you right now, we will get them from our colleagues and we will shoot those back out to you. There's certainly a lot to be considered in this whole enterprise. But we're hoping that some of the information provided on the checklist gives you that food for thought in terms of how you're planning your own development of and the rollout of that within your agency. We have some more questions that seem to have been coming in here. Okay. Let's see, the first one, what are the MCO requirements for outpatient opioid treatment providers? I think we have to go to the actual individual MCOs to get their requirements on those, and I would think that each MCO will have a particular way in which they're going to frame that up. So you should be having discussions right now with the MCOs in terms of contracts, et cetera, and that would be a question that I would certainly pose to them in terms of what those requirements are going to be. In North Carolina, we started out not having an outpatient opioid treatment provider. We recognize that as a need within our particular community, and we requested that that be developed, and we had set up some of those requirements. So that will be a function of the MCO. But I would go to each MCO and be asking about that. Okay. What is the MCO staffing ratio requirements for substance abuse providers? Again, that will be going from the MCO as well, if I'm understanding the question correctly. Are the UM staff required to be part of the interdisciplinary team to assist in developing the plan of care? It's my understanding that they're not required to be part of that in developing the plan of care. I think that it's certainly helpful if they are present during that development and can be part of that discussion, certainly listening to it, maybe frame up some things maybe the team is not thinking about, but they are not required to be part of that. Okay, I think I'm trying to read my next question here. Hi. There was another question also about the opioid treatment and the requirements for the outpatient, if there was outpatient authorization required. We're going to have to look to the MCO to provide that information. I can tell you that our plan in North Carolina for our MCO was that we did, but I cannot speak to what the requirement will be here in New York. The next question we have here is the UM staff person required to be an RN or a case manager or LPN suffice? Certainly, there are no particular guidelines or requirements on this. Doesn't have to be an RN. This is something that has been suggested often because of RNs having their particular medical knowledge and so can cover many bases and often have had sometimes experience being on the other side, being with the MCOs and having been UM staff as well. So they certainly bring some particular skill sets to it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an RN. It could be someone of a different discipline or background, but they really should be knowledgeable about the MCO processes as well and have some really strong clinical background as well. We also have, I believe this was talked about in the last webinar, about a job description, and that's available online through MCTAC. So you may want to reference that as well. But you're really kind of free to make your own choices about that with your staffing. But so it's kind of free for that. Again, the opiate treatment providers, again, we're going to the MCO, and some of the questions are going to have to be addressed much more to the MCOs, particularly, and we don't have that information to share with you at this particular time. I'd be happy to do so if it was available, but it is not, to my knowledge. Okay, let's see. In your experience with an IOP, or outpatient 3 to 5 times a week, individual and group. In your experience, is there intense scrutiny from the plans with this? We also understand IOP to be temporary and 7 weeks in duration to stabilize client. Oh, hold on. Can you comment on IOP and UM? Excellent question. I would tell you that in my experience, and I'm speaking strictly from my experience here, nothing official, but that the MCOs do tend to look at much more intensive services more closely as opposed to what we termed basic benefit, of strictly outpatient kind of routine psychotherapy visit. So that we looked more at the intensive outpatient criteria and the people who were in that and saw if they really needed it and followed that with care, the same as other fairly intensive services. For example, ACT was something that we looked at carefully. We did strict inpatient stays, reviewing those every 3 days. Our children who were in high level of services, no, we're not doing children in New York yet, but certainly any children who would be what New York has termed an RTF got particular attention as well. But that's a long answer to your question, but basically, yes, I would expect that the IOP will probably get some degree of scrutiny here, and so be certainly be looking for you to be documenting carefully all the benefits someone is getting for that, why they need IOP, why another level of care will really not be sufficient, and then how is that really being utilized and moving them towards their goals in terms of recovery. Okay, and I think there was some clarification, IOP, behavioral IOP, not substance abuse, but an IOP model for mental health. Yes, and I was thinking along the mental health as well. We had opportunities in North Carolina for an intensive outpatient model on mental health, and it did get more scrutiny as well. And we looked for people being able to get considerable benefit of that. But we also realized that there would be people, again, who are outliers, and that we would need to extend their treatment perhaps on that. So that was really on a case-by-case basis we would do that. Okay. All right, our next one mentions that communication must be timely, done quickly, it's time sensitive, et cetera. Yes, I did say that. How much time is allowed? Is that MCO specific? I would believe it probably is MCO specific on that, and so you will need to look at the guidelines that the MCO gives you with that. I would say that you have to look at when, if an appeal is going to be raised, what is the time frame given to you for an appeal, when it needs to be lodged, et cetera. The MCOs, by the way, have their own timelines when they have to turn things around as well, and when they have to answer to their accrediting bodies, they need to report that as well. So again, it's a two-way street. But the sooner that you can wrap that up, certainly be doing that as well. On inpatient, you know, that's almost instantaneous that you would need to do that, but I would certainly do it. Your intensive services are going to have a quicker turnaround and a need to do it than your basic benefit routine outpatient psychotherapy as well. So it could be a matter of days, 3 to 5 days, that sort of thing. It will really depend on what each MCO is going to be required of you. But you should always have in the back of your mind that, you know, you may have to turn it around, and your UM people are very helpful in terms of knowing what the MCOs will require and having their fingers on the pulse of this as well, and hopefully able to shepherd the treatment team and getting that clinical information together relatively quickly. Hi. Do you see MCOs pressuring housing agencies to take clients? Right now, housing refusals are creating bottlenecks. I think that this is always an issue. Certainly, they may put some pressure on housing agencies to take people. This was the kind of situation that we found that this is not unique to New York, and we found in North Carolina that someone was really clinically ready for discharge, but where were they going to go? And finding a suitable disposition so that people did not relapse, thereby defeating the whole purpose of having them in that level of service to begin with. So certainly it's a possibility that that might happen, which would be the best for everybody concerned, but can't really swear to or promise to what the MCOs will do with that. Certainly, when I was with the MCO, we at times held people in a level of care till they really had a suitable disposition. I don't know if that meant that we were kinder, gentler, and we shouldn't necessarily apply that to everyone, but we really did not like to see, unless under extraordinary circumstances, people discharged to shelter. But of course, that was a different situation. It was a much different. I was in an urban area of 1 million as opposed to 8 million people, so, and with a different level of resources. But certainly we would like people to see, have people discharged to an appropriate discharge option for them to continue with recovery and not be putting themselves in jeopardy of relapse. Okay, let's see. in New York State, substance abuse has a full continuum of residential treatment, often condition of probation or requirement of treatment under drug court. What have been your experience with these situations regarding MCO utilization management? That's a great question. And we also in North Carolina had a full continuum of treatment, and we had drug court and probation, et cetera. During the time that we were in operation, we really did not run afoul with the court system. We really, I think over time we would have probably been at some loggerheads with people, but generally speaking, we were on the same page with the court in terms of if someone was really demonstrating their need for treatment at that level, we were in accord with it, and we did not really challenge the court on this. And particularly, we had cultivated as an MCO a very good relationship with our treatment courts. We had drug treatment court, DWI court, mental health court, all of these different ones, so that we were able regularly to speak with the judges and talk about what some of the challenges were and how, you know, there was clinical criteria as well and the judicial criteria, and come to some meeting of the minds. So I don't know quite how our local New York MCOs will approach that. Hopefully they will engender similar relationships as well. I would not think that right out of the box there would be a lot of challenge to that either. I think the MCOs also have to hit their stride in terms of how all of these things are going to work. So, but I don't know how that might play out over a little bit more time. Okay. For inpatient, let's see, after the first 72 hours, we do not require daily notes, but rather weekly. Sometimes it's difficult to get approval for more days when the progress notes aren't there. Should we look at our policies, read documentation requirements, and possibly require more frequent notes from team members? I'll just share with you in terms of my experience with this. On UM for inpatient, we reviewed our cases every day. And what we would do is we would, of course, authorize when someone was in the hospital, and then we would do our re-auth every 3 days on this. And we were looking, our average length of stay on inpatient was probably 7 to 10 days. So I would say on inpatient, the more notes you have, the better, because we would look at the reauthorization, but there were times, I will tell you, if it was very sketchy, and I don't mean that in the common urban parlance of sketchy, but meaning it didn't contain enough information, we would then ask to see the treatment notes or ask to speak to the attending, et cetera. So the more information you have with your documentation, the better off you're going to be, because you'll probably need to provide that information. And to save a lot of time on the phone and the back and forth sort of thing, it would be helpful. So I would say, I would encourage you to at least revisit your documentation requirements and see if you might want to do them a little bit more frequently on that. I think it could be helpful to you in the long run. So, okay. With HARPs, do you see more relaxed OTR schedules, not needing to submit as many outpatient treatment report auth forms for certain numbers of visits? I don't know. It might be something to be considering. In North Carolina, we didn't have the particular HARP plan, though certainly the kinds of folks and the presentations were very similar, but we hadn't carved them out specifically. But we would recognize that these were folks who had particular needs, et cetera, and that we were not going to see change quite as rapidly, and that change might be incremental, positive, but incremental. So can't really know, don't have the crystal ball with what the MCOs may do with that, but they may look at this population in a unique way, considering. The goal being certainly that these folks are spending less time in the ER in terms of their behavioral health and their physical health kinds of things, and we're not going to turn things around very, very quickly, though certainly intensive treatment and being always looking to feel very positively about their recovery and to maintain that in terms of our focus on our OTRs. We'll have to see what the MCOs prescribe, as it were, in terms of that auth calendar. And one thing that also, we were talking before about appeals and denials as well. I also just want to point out, we've been talking here about the clinical side of things as well, and I've really been, as a clinician, focusing really on clinical denial and appeal in that process as well. And just also want to point out, on your fiscal side, there are denials and appeals as well. And we've had a whole series here also on revenue cycle management, and I would suggest that that's also really strong, and it can hurt clinicians to go through that as well and understand that, and understand what those denials are as well, because you can have someone your client doing really well on the clinical side and things are working, and then things are having some difficulty in terms of how the claims are submitted in denial. So you've got some parallel processes here. So it may be something you just want to be cognizant of as well, and some of the terminology there too. Okay, we don't seem to have any other questions coming in right now. So it may be time for us to just say that we are going to be signing off. To submit any other questions that occur to you, particularly to review some of the material we presented today. Other questions that you have, feel free to shoot those to us. We'll be happy to answer them as best we can, and also to collect them, and as we get more information, including some of the MCOs, that hopefully we can get answers back out to you as well. So this is all of our process for getting that information, collecting your questions, and for us all getting on the same page. And here is our information about our contact information for CTAC and for MCTAC, and please sign up for more offerings and trainings as we go. As we find out more need, we are happy to develop them and to answer your questions, and to be able to give you what you need in order to prepare for this important journey that we're all embarking upon. So thanks so much for participating today. I've enjoyed delivering this and enjoyed chatting with you as well. Bye-bye.